Drew Peacock. At first, it just sounds like a random name, but it's the name of arguably one of the most influential single car and racing content creators currently on YouTube. Now, personally, although I might be biased because I'm a subscriber, I think it's pretty easy to see why he's become so famous. He's a guy with multiple built-out, ready-to-race cars who both actively participates in his local car scene and also acts as an introduction to the car scene for people who don't know much about it yet. He wasn't always a super rich guy with a bunch of cars and hundreds of thousands of subscribers though, and in recent times he's become known for something besides just being a car guy. He is the biggest hater in the car scene. Let me give you some history on Drew Peacock and his channel, tell you why his hating has become so controversial, and then show you why it's probably a good thing for him to do. So, yeah. Alright, let's start with the basics. Drew Peacock, as he's known on YouTube, is a 27-year-old YouTuber and streamer who makes both gaming and car/racing related content. As of now, he has surpassed 700,000 subscribers. Although his most famous content revolves around his cars and the events and activities surrounding them, he actually started his YouTube channel by making videos about airsoft gameplay and weapons. His first 16 videos were as simple as could be, just him going to airsoft matches at Hollywood Sports in California or giving honest reviews about his airsoft loadout with some text overlays.
This is my review and unboxing of the M92 by WE gas blowback pistol.
It was this way until the 17th video, if Mustangs starred in a horror film. His first video ever centered around cars. It wouldn't be long after this video that we'd be introduced to his first car in How to Drive a Manual Transmission Car, a 2002 Ford Mustang equipped with a 3.8 SX V6, which would make notable appearances later in his channel's history. Just one video after this, he'd go on to introduce his previously modified 2006 Mustang GT, which would become the primary project car of his channel going forward. Within the next year, Drew would go on to release Ricer Cars on Craigslist, which did well for his relatively new channel and is currently sitting at 90,000 views. This style of content, reacting to car listings on different marketplace websites, would become a regular part of Drew Peacock's channel and is still currently being used. His first video in his library to break into the 6-digit views mark would be How to Make Your Car Louder for Free, with 4 exclamation marks, with a whopping 246,000 views. Following this video, he'd start releasing his staple content, mainly more Ricer Cars videos, his Car Fail series where he looks at user-submitted clips on different social media platforms, and Rice or Nice, where he rates subscribers' cars, and his channel would really start gaining speed. 2 years after becoming a content creator, Drew would end up getting fired from his job, and shortly after, he'd release a video detailing why. As it turns out, his higher-ups had decided to let him go to make space for new hires, which was covered up by the lie that Drew had been a shoddy employee who wasn't willing to do overtime. This was of little negative impact to Drew though, because in general, he had a number of problems with higher-ups. Things like being forced to work through lunch hours and not having his paperwork for vacation hours properly filed, leading to a period of time where he wasn't even racking up vacation hours. The only reason that Drew saw fit as a fireable offense was that the job was for a union, and he had been less than responsible with union dues and duties. For better or for worse, Drew Peacock now had a good amount of free time, and it ended up working in his favor, because he'd start releasing more and better videos. From this point and following his firing, Drew's videos would regularly see over 100, 200, and even 300,000 views. The channel would steadily grow from there, and in 2020, Drew would make a purchase that became another mainstay of his channel, a manual transmission, non-turbo Mark IV Toyota Supra, which was imported from Japan, meaning it's a right-hand drive car. This purchase would be closely followed by Drew accidentally blowing the motor in his Mustang GT.
So what ended up happening was the torque and the leverage from the Pro Charger pulley just pretty much snapped my crank. My crank is sticking out of my motor, so got that quick disconnect crank. You know, no one's gonna be stealing my car anytime soon, so
2021 would also see some huge events with Drew turning his first ever car, the V6 Mustang, into a drift car by getting rid of the old 3.8 liter V6 and dropping in a turbocharged 2JZ motor, similar to what his Supra had, as well as him buying his first ever supercar, a McLaren MP-412C, and bringing his built Ford Mustang GT back to life with a Whipple supercharged Generation 3 Coyote motor. To top it all off for the year, Drew would both buy a 92 EG Honda Civic hatchback and end up releasing his most viral video to date.
Mom reacts to my 800 horsepower Supra. She wasn't ready.
Which would go on to set a channel high with 2.7 million views. 2022 would start off with some strong content, as the Mustang GT would end up needing a new supercharger as well as shredding right through a serpentine belt. Later on in the year, the new Civic would get a K20 motor swapped in and a build would officially be announced. The Supra would be involved in a sideswiping accident. Drew would go on to buy a brand new Subaru WRX STI and the 2JZ Mustang would be sold. 2023 would also end up being pretty interesting, with another motor blowing up. This time though, it's the Civic. Besides that, there'd be a point in time where every one of Drew's cars would be out of action except for his original Mustang GT. Following this, the Subaru would end up with power steering issues, eventually catching fire, but quickly being put out and then listed for sale. Drew ended up replacing it with a brand new GMC Colorado ZR2. The year would come to a close with a series titled Poser Police being released, which actually made a decent departure from the regular content. Poser Police essentially saw Drew researching and watching clips of other creators who he deemed as posers, and breaking down why they aren't genuine members of the car scene, from things like tacky mods to cringy posts which only serve to inflate the poster's ego. And from there, we're on to current year. This year, Drew sent the Supra off to the shop to receive a fully built motor, which would come back strong enough to produce roughly 1,000 horsepower. The Civic would go through an engine scare, and then relatively soon after, the Supra would catch fire while on a trailer, and the front end would be completely burnt to a crisp. The car is currently being worked on as of the making of this video. The McLaren build would be completed, as it was now set up for track use. Drew would purchase a new S650 Ford Mustang GT for his girlfriend around this time. After this, the supercharged Mustang would be sideswiped in similar fashion to what happened to the Supra 2 years prior. Finally, as of 3 days ago, in relation to the making of this video, Drew Peacock sold the McLaren, sold the Civic, and has bought himself a C6 Chevy Corvette ZR1. The Supra is still making appearances while being worked on. Rice or Nice, Instagram car fails, and the Ricers for Sale On series are still going on, and this whole time, Drew has yet to majorly change his style. This is what consistency looks like. Mind you, this whole time, all of his background footage has been either him playing COD or some other game, him going to car meets and looking at cars, or him driving and racing people in real life.
Fuck you!
So then what about this guy, besides maybe a knack for racing in places that don't strictly meet the definition of a racetrack, could be so controversial? After all, he's just a part-time reaction YouTuber. Well, I don't know if you've realized by now, but basically all of his non-racing content, which takes up the majority of his video library, is centered around him being able to poke fun and make light of things like badly modified cars and viral accidents at the expense of the user who posted the video or the participants involved in the video's content. That's the very foundation of series like Car Instagram Fails or Ricers on Facebook or OfferUp. He's looking for things to shit on, because he's the biggest hater. And because of his size, not physically, just as a YouTube channel, the effect that he has on parts of the car community are pretty visible. Drew's effect can't get more evident than when you look at Poser Police. Now, obviously, I won't say that Drew is directly responsible for whatever change might be correlated to his channel, but I will say that he does in part take the cut, because he is essentially putting a spotlight on the people he chooses to talk about in Poser Police. A good example to keep in mind would be WR Alex. I agree with the general points of the video, like saying that making half of your car content about yourself and spending half of your life at a gas pump so you can record TikToks, but the amount of shit that this guy was catching had such an effect that he had to post a TikTok saying that he started blocking all of his haters and he's basically done with gas station clips because there isn't one gas station picture or clip in any of his more recent TikTok and Instagram stuff. By this, I'm going to assume that although Drew Peacock does warn his fans not to go hate on people, there are always going to be enough stray haters that they'll pretty much always have some notable effect on the person that Drew's video is about. That isn't necessarily a direct result of his criticism though, it's just a result of his fan base. And creators shouldn't have to be watching what their fans do every second of the day to make sure that they aren't making them look bad, but some communities are just bound to act a certain way no matter what. Another good example of the effect that Drew has would be his 2 videos about DGX Extreme. The first one was pretty tame, just talking about how silly DGX looks trying to make his opinion about cars seem rational. But the second video served more like a call to action for people to go shit on him. Even though Drew says not to bully anyone in his video's description and says that he doesn't really like making videos that just serve to criticize a person instead of their car, he literally ends the video by saying that people who are pieces of shit deserve to be called out for it. Put simply, I just think that Drew and the content that he makes operate in a way that makes it pretty much impossible to prevent some of his fans from being haters, because his content attracts them. People go out of their way to watch things that they agree with, and especially when it's someone with a large following who essentially justifies their position. At this point, you can either try to mitigate it or stop caring about the negative side, and honestly, I think the latter is the way to go. Anyone with a following is bound to get fans that they don't like. Drew's case is exactly the same. I also don't think anyone else should care for that matter, because through his criticism and light making, Drew does do some good. So then why might it be a good thing for him to be such a hater? Well, let's think about the stuff that he chooses to pass judgment on when he makes videos like Instagram car fails, or car TikTok cringe, or Ricer cars on Craigslist/OfferUp/Marketplace. He pokes fun at things that show irresponsibility or ignorance or lack of taste. He gets to laugh at people and call them names when they try to do donuts or drift and end up making a fool of themselves by hitting a curb or realizing that they weren't even sideways a little bit or slamming into a parked car. He gets to call people names for putting the ugly accessories that don't match their paint on their car and then trying to brag about how great it looks or try to sell it for an unreasonable price. When he sees things that aren't just stupid but dangerous as well, he changes his tone to be more serious, to put emphasis on how bad these things are. In terms of how people customize and modify their cars, taste is for the most part subjective, but for things that can affect others in negative ways, like getting into an accident and getting injured or getting car meets shut down because of a noise complaint, Drew Peacock has a pretty agreeable and responsible position. Even with a good position on one issue though, I realize that it could be kinda hypocritical to say that the guy who commonly uses open roads as grounds to race on can have an acceptable position on what is safe and okay. The thing is, every car he has is set up to handle speed well. He has rules that he conducts under to make sure that things don't go badly for him and everyone around him. He's not just another one of the boneheads who buys a scat pack just to get into an accident not too long after because they were cutting up or took their car to a takeover just to run into a bunch of people. Every part of his car that has to do with safety in some way is checked over, from his tires and suspension to his interior, just to make sure some catastrophic failure never happens. So in conclusion, it's a good thing that he's a hater, because the stuff that he hates on is more often than not agreed upon to be bad. And although he does less than perfect things with his cars in terms of how safe these things are, he constantly has things under control. He constantly tries to avoid directly insulting people unless they themselves are doing something wrong, and he tries as much as possible to be real with his viewers. And I honestly don't care if him shitting on people gets a little stale every now and then, because even though his criticisms are pretty decent, I'm just watching because I also own a Mustang, and that's basically it.